Okay, good morning.
All right, we're at Shin Yud. Continuing Muktza. We should be done by tomorrow, I think. Okay. One important thing to point out when it comes to Muktza, we're getting close to the end, so just to help get a full picture, I'm not sure if it was mentioned. When we're talking about it from all the Muktza, there's different categories of different types of kalim. So just interesting to point out that a kli, for the purposes of Muktza, for the most part, has no relevance to a kli when we're talking about makabel tuma. Two separate things. The Gemara does make a comparison that they're similar in the aspect of when would it be similar? For shivrei kelim. If you want to know if it's still called a kli, it still has a usage, so then they're very similar. That if it's no longer usable, then it could become muktza during Shabbos, and it could become tahor for the purposes of tuma and tara. But as intrinsically, to decide if something is a kli shemalachto leheter, kli shemalachto le'iser, it has no relevance. Just two quick, simple examples. We know pshute klei pieces of wood, are not makabel tuma, and then we have matches and toothpicks. Matches would be a kli shemalachto le'iser, and toothpicks would be kli shemalachto leheter. So you see, when it comes to Muktza, really, intrinsically from the beginning, it's not really relevant to Mantara. Okay? One other thing we're going to come to real soon, so I'll just bring it up now, because it brings up an important point, is let's say you find a Mezuzah on the floor. It fell down on Shabbos, a Mezuzah on the floor. Is it Muktza? And whether it is or isn't, can you move it and pick it up?
It is Muktza, you can move it.
So you say it's Muktza, and you could move it. Very good. And?
I actually had this question for you, because we...
You don't mind telling me, because I want quick answers to this year.
There is a tshuva that says it's not Muktza, you can pick it up and you can even put it back on. I believe it's from the Yaakov.
Okay. So someone says Rav Yaakov Emden says it's not Muktza. So it would appear to me that it's definitely Muktza. There is a discussion, Mahmat Kis or not. And so we had previously a case where a delit, a door of a house, comes off. So pretty much it's not so clear from the Shulchan Aruch, but from the poskim, it's pretty clear. For example, Magen Avraham, Mishnah Berurah, Menucha Sava, Orach Chaim, they all say it's Muktza. The Rambam says it beferish. The question is, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it with his explanation, but so the point is, anytime you have an item that's 100% set aside and you're not going to use it, you're not going to play with it, you're not going to open it, you're not going to use it, it has a din of Muktza. Whether you call it a kli or not, and it's not it's probably machmas gufo, because it's intended to stay there and not to move around. That's why a delit, when it comes off, it's muktza. It was never designated to it's a kli that's usable. It's not muktza when it's attached, but once it comes detached, you never have a mind to move it from place to place. So that could be very well why a mezuzah would be muktza, like you mentioned. Why it wouldn't be, it's a good question, but maybe not everyone paskins like this Rambam. And so therefore, that would apply to a clock on the wall and a painting that's no longer there. That you always have in mind to be on the wall and you never have in mind to touch it. Obviously, paintings and pictures that you plan that you normally show people. So, you never move it. You never move it. It's always there.
But it's always there. And if it falls off and you do interact with it, I think it's a little bit of a different application.
All right. Fine. So that's...
I'll find the tshuva. Let's go back.
In Shemir Shabbos Kilchasa, he does, his conclusion is like that, but again, different opinions. And he says you can move it because of bizayon. So we know there are examples. Deleka, bizayon, talked about tefillin. These are all cases where we know you're allowed to move them. Okay, to savor bizayon. So that's... Alright, I think we'll move on. Now, if it's in a drawer, you're going to sell it. Obviously, it's machmat chisaron kis. The normal stam mezuzah you have lying around that you're not selling is not muktza. It's like all Sifrei Kodesh. You can always open it up and read it. But the question was a mezuzah that no one ever touches and moves, and you don't want anyone to touch it and move it. Okay.
clear, mine's on the mezuzah that was on your doorpost, and then it fell off on Shabbos.
Right, so no, but the mezuzah itself, no one ever has in mind to touch it and play with it. Not,
Every time they walk in and they kiss it.
but they don't move it, they don't use it, they don't read it. Okay, anyway. Tov. Shin Yud Aleph. Eight Shetilim Bo'odagim. So here you have a piece of wood to hang fish. Alpha Pishahu Ma'us, even though it's a bit disgusting. Again, it's not like tsoa, an excrement. Mutar L'taltulo, you're allowed to move the stick. The Kai Malem Muktza Machmat Mius, Ki Rabbi Shimon Deshari. We hold like Rabbi Shimon, that yes, there is Muktza, but not so much Muktza. Not as much as Rabbi Yehuda. So on this aspect, he's Mekel. So that's the halacha, even though, okay. Bet. And shum ochel talush l'achila muktzat l'Shabbos. So any food that you have that's edible, right? It's not mechuber l'karka. You don't have to take it off the tree yet. It's already off the tree. So then it's mutter. Now, the tamari mushkedim sharapiradom dim lischara. Now, this depends on the case, but in general, we're assuming any kind of produce that you're selling, even though you're setting aside it for selling purposes, the owner, he eats it. He himself, he doesn't want it to get wasted, but he'll eat from it himself on Shabbos if he wants. So therefore, mutar lechol mehem b'Shabbos, and it's not muksa, it's not a problem. Afilu chitim shezera'am b'karka v'dayim le'ishrishu. Now, if you have wheat that you put it on the ground, but it didn't start to sprout or to grow, so then it's still usable, and you might still use it. It's not muksa in your mind, so therefore you're allowed to use it. It's not muksa. So too, what if they're related today? No. So we're talking about beitzim that are not muksa, beitzim that are not brand new or nolad issues or muksa issues. Talking about you had a beitza that was already there for a couple days, and then for sure it's not a problem if even if the tarnagolet's on it, you're allowed to take it unless it reaches a point where you're for sure not going to use it anymore. V'chen tamarim alakutim kodem bishulan v'kontinentam b'salim v'hem mitbashim aleim mutar lechol mehem kodem bishulan. And so too, that even things that are not quite ripe, you can still eat from them if you want to, and they're not muksa. Aval grogeros v'tzimukim. They're edible but not ripe. Okay, very good. Aval gorgorot v'tzimukim shemanichim otam, and maybe I'm not 100% sure. It's a very good question. If it's not edible yet and it's not ripe enough, it might not be muksa. I don't know. Good question. Because listen to this. When you talk about grogeros v'tzimukim, here you're trying to make raisins. You're trying to make raisins and dried figs. So then what do? You put them aside to dry them out. So then they're usher, once you set them aside to dry them out, you don't want to eat them anymore. So then it becomes usher, muksa on Shabbos. Shehen masrichot kodem shitbashu. Because what happens, when they dry out, first they become kind of disgusting and they smell bad. And then it becomes more dry and then it becomes edible again. Since they became masriach 100%, so then they became disgusting to you, and you set them aside not to use them. Since you set them aside physically, and they're not edible, so then they become muksa. But before bishulan is a good question. In the other case, I'm not sure. Haga, yesho, and then they become like avanim and afar, machmas gufo. Yeshomrim, the ein hachana shayach v'shel ein Yehudi v'afil gorgos v'tzimukim shebiyado mutarim. Here's a major principle for muksa. Anything that a goy sets aside is not muksa for Shabbos. Okay, he doesn't have this concept of setting things aside, not to use them. And Chazal were never matakin. Anything that they have is not muksa. Saying for the purposes of them setting aside. Something that intrinsically is muksa, even if they own it, it's intrinsically muksa. But anything that comes to setting aside, that doesn't apply to them.
He's working for you, the guy.
It doesn't matter. It could be he owns it. Whatever the situation is, he can't make something muksa. I mean, if it's yours, it could be you made it muksa by setting it aside. Okay. Okay. Now, just to point out, that's the Shulchan Aruch. There are some achronim who are machmer for a goy, on him setting things aside. But that's that's the Rama, and there are some who are machmer. Gimel. Bein ve'eser achila, bein ve'eser tilto. Whether it comes to eating or moving, kol davar sheyar oy bein hashmashos, anything that was usable during bein hashmashos, that's the key point. Mishnah Berurah quotes from the pasuk, "Vayar b'yom hashishi ve'achinu et asher yaviu," and it's all about Friday afternoon. When Shabbos starts in, that's right bein hashmashos. We learned that already before. That's the koveya time. That's when we establish the time. Im ira bo davar shenkalka bo bayom v'chazer nitkan bo bayom chazer letero. So aval davar shehukta bein hashmashos aser kol hayom. So here it's a little bit of a double standard on the strict side. Anything that was a muktza during bein hashmashos, it's muktza for the entire Shabbos. Something that was mutter at bein hashmashos could still become aser during Shabbos, and it could even revert back to being mutter in the middle of Shabbos. If it, a situation of where it became usable, not usable, or something became, for example, wet and you can't use it anymore, and then it dried out, and now it's usable again. Okay. So let's go to Dalet. So we had this famous case of of raisins becoming muktza. Right, you set them aside. So here, interesting case. They became completely raisins before Shabbos started. So when Bein Hashmashos kicked in, it was ready to eat. So when the owner didn't know about that, he put it on his roof, the raisins, and he set them aside. So he was mekatzem midaito. He was not going to use it. And lo and behold, without him even knowing, they became ready Bein Hashmashos. Someone who's bar mitzvah went upstairs to the roof, or went outside, whatever the situation was, and checked it, and they know. So you have Eidos that it was ready before Shabbos, but he had no idea. In his mind, it was still set aside. Mutar, the halacha is, Rameko, Chazal or Kavu, that even though it was, because he had in mind that when it becomes ripe, he'll want to use them again. He wasn't mekatzeh for forever. It was only because it was temporary. And he just didn't know when that temporary period happened. So the halacha is, it's mutter. Okay.
For him as well.
For him as well, for sure. Well, for all muktza, it goes by the Baal Habayit, the owner. So he's really the deciding factor. If it's muktza for him, it's mutter for everybody. If it's muktza for him, it's muktza for everyone. And if it's mutter for him, it's mutter for everyone. Okay, very good. Thank you. Hey, grogarot v'tzimukim, the chazu v'lo chazu. Okay, so now you have a case where the raisins they're starting to get edible. They're starting to become dry enough to eat. Not 100%, but they're getting there. So the ika inchi dachile v'ika dela achile. So some people would eat the raisins at this point, and some would definitely not. So yeah, it's a right in between period. So then you have this halacha. Azmene nafikle mitorat muktza v'i lo. So as long as you set it aside to dry out, it's muktza until it's completely ready, or it's muktza where it's ready for some and not ready for others, and you specifically said, okay, now they're not muktza anymore. So you saw them and you said, okay, now they're starting to be edible for some people, so now I'm saying they're not muktza. So then just by doing that, it's not muktza anymore. But if they're completely not edible, and you just, verbally said, okay, now I'm going to eat them, hazman alav meltahi. Just saying that they're not muktza is not enough. They have to either be edible partially, or you have to do a maisa with them, and bring them in, or do something with them to show that they are ready. A little subtle nuance here, the Mishnah Berurah just points out, that the poskim point out, that if it's something that the case over here by Grogarot, we're a little more strict when it comes to Bein Hashmashos, that if they're completely not ready at Bein Hashmashos, so then, even though it might be ready on Shabbos, it's muktza for the entire Shabbos. But that's normal. But he points out that, again, subtle difference here, maybe a bit confusing. If you have, let's say, something that's completely man-made, you just mix in the cold house, water and a raisin, water and some kind of a fruit, and you want it to get flavor, I guess, into the water a little bit. I don't know, lemons, whatever it is. You want to get a little flavor into the liquid, and it's not ready at Bein Hashmashos, but you expect it, or it's normal for it to get ready during Shabbos. So then that's not a case of Muktza, because you're not dependent at all on nature, like the sunlight or anything like that. And so since you're planning to be able to possibly use them on Shabbos, you are not mekatzeh dato. So if you make lemon water to drink right before Shabbos, you're allowed to drink it later on at the night or in the morning, even though you wouldn't have drinking it during Bein Hashmashos. Okay. Let's go to Vav. Kol davar she'asur l'taltalo. Anything that's asur to move. Asur li'tein tachtav kli kadei she'yipol l'tochal. So anything that's, we don't want to, here, mipnei she'osar ha'kli b'tiltav v'nimsa mevata kli mehechana. There's a principle in halacha, Chazal, basically it's domel es soter kli, or kilkel. So, domel to an iser darabanan, we don't want you to take a kli and make it non-usable on Shabbos. So you don't want to put a kli underneath something that'll make it asur to move because of the thing on top of it. Aval muter lichbot alav kli. So you don't want a muksa item on Shabbos to land on something that's going to end up having to stay there all Shabbos, and then you can't use it anymore. But you are allowed to take a kli and cover, because you can always lift it up again. As long as you're not completely, making a kli not usable for the entire Shabbos, you can, if you have something muksa you don't want to touch, right? We just had Pesach here. You have chametz on Pesach, and you don't want to, on Yantiv, you're allowed to just cover it up with the kli so people don't see it or touch it. And that's not a problem of mavata kli mehechana. But you cannot touch it. Right? So the Mishnah Berurah points out, you're allowed to touch Muktza, that's not a problem, you're not allowed to move it. So what does it mean you're not allowed to touch it? We're talking about an egg, for example. You can't touch an item that's 100% going to move when you touch it. Okay. So, but normally you are allowed to touch Muktza, just not to move it. Zayin. Now you have a bed, or a chair, whatever the item is, and you have money on it. Money we know is Muktza. Or it was a basis, a davar iser, I had money on it during Bein Hashmashos. So then, for the entire Shabbos, asr l'tauta, you're not allowed to move it, right? We learned this. Once it becomes Muktza for Bein Hashmashos, it's Muktza for the entire Shabbos. So even L'tzarach Gufo or Mekomo, it's Aser. The basis becomes Aser. Yeah. Now we're going to learn.
How could it be worse than the item that was on it?
How can it be worse than the item that was on it?
Let me rephrase. Would it be worse than the item that was on it?
So that's actually a question mark. The Mishnah Berurah points out the din habasis ke'oto muksa sha'alav. Whatever, it's a basis for something, right? We're talking about it, that's the case we're talking about. So whatever the item's level of muksa is, that's what the basis takes upon itself, that same level. Okay. V'hu adin, right? So the case over here was money. V'hu adin l'kol davar heter shemunach alav iser. Okay, aval im ein alea tama'ot v'gam lo haya alea ben hashmashos muter l'taltala. Right? We learned that already. That during Ben Hashmashos there was no money on it, and then somehow the money got on it during Ben Hashmashos, and it got removed afterwards. A non-Jew, a kid, whatever, mistakes. So then it's no longer muksa. Mutar l'taltala once the item doesn't have the muksa on it anymore. Afilu yichad alamad v'nicham alea mibod yom kivan shesilkan kodam Ben Hashmashos. So even if you have an item that you set aside to put the money on it or in it, and you used it Ben Hashmashos for the item, for the money, but before Shabbos came, you removed it Ben Hashmashos, or at least you had a mind to remove it, and therefore it's not a problem. Mishnah Berurah points out an interesting case. I think it would be like a tzedakah box. If you have something that's always miyuchad only for money, so if it's designated for money, and it's only used for money, like a tzedakah box, he says it would be muksa on Shabbos as a basis, a davar, basis for the money. So it would be machmas gufo. And even if the tzedakah box is empty, you're not allowed to move it. Unless it was never used already. Because it's an item that's 100% set aside for that. But if you bought a brand new tzedakah box, and you never used it yet for money, so then he says that would be, it says Zman Alav Milta, and it's not Muktza. Okay, just interesting. Okay. Some are Machmer, just because we mentioned it. When it comes to a basis, it has its own separate category, and a basis, by definition, is always, it could be more strict than the item on top of it, like you mentioned. And it's always, so that's a machlokas achronim, but it does seem like the Mishnah Berurah and the Ramah are middle on this one, that it follows it. Okay. Let's go on. Haga. V'yesh osrim b'yichad l'kach v'hiniach behem af al pi shesilka miba'od yom. That's what we just mentioned, the tzedakah box. That if it was miyuchad for it, it's always aser. L'chein asru taltel kis shel ma'ot af al pi shehotzi amot mimenu miba'od yom. So your wallet, you can't move it around, even though you emptied it before Shabbos. Ela im kein asa bo ma'aseh shepetacho lemilamato v'silko min hayichod v'chen noagim. Unless you did something to undo it from being only used for money, or you use it for something else. Okay, umiu letzorach gufo letzorach makomo mutar. But it's a basis, and since you emptied it before Shabbos, it doesn't have the same level, and therefore you are allowed to move letzorach gufo letzorach makomo to a lower level. Okay. This was the case where there's the machloket, where the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah Meiko. Sorry. Okay? But otherwise, I think, anyways, we're passing that a basis takes upon the same thing as the item itself. V'chein beskis hatafur bebeged. Now let's say you have some kind of a pocket, or some kind of a pouch, that's sewn on and attached to the clothing. So then, if you detached it, then it's not a problem to wear the beged. The kis batel etzlo, it's just batel to it, it's just sewn on a little bit to it, but it's a separate item. And even if you leave money in there by mistake, it wasn't intended, you're not going to make the whole, and the pair of pants or the whole beged is not going to become a basis for this pouch that's sewn on. The money is not really on the beged itself, it's in a side pocket that's only attached to it. But you shouldn't wear your pants or this clothing while you have this money attached into it, because you might end up going outside with it. Mishnah Berurah points out it depends on how the pocket is, how it's sewn in, and it could be that our pants, I'll leave it as a question mark, our pants, the way our pockets are made, it might be an question mark, it might be an integral part of the pants, and therefore, if you have money in your pocket, it could be that it makes your whole pants into a basis, and so that would be a problem. But that's only a problem if you intended to leave your wallet or your, whatever your Muktza items are inside your pants the entire Shabbos. If you had a mind to take them out before Shabbos, and you just forgot about it, then it doesn't become a basis. It only becomes a basis when you wanted it to be there at Bein HaShemashos.
Men's white shirts would for sure be Muktza, because...
Men's white shirts are Muktza?
White shirts.
Why?
With the keys inside the pocket of the white shirt. Because it's always made that the pocket is just on top of
So you're saying the bag, right, so you're saying, certainly according to the way the Mishnah Berurah explains it, then a pocket of a shirt would be considered an integral part, and if you intend to leave it there at Bein HaShemashos, then that would be a problem. That sounds correct. Very good. Chet. Kli. Sheyesh alav davar ha'asar. V'davar ha'muter. Now, another main principle, you have a kli, talking about a basis, and you have two things on it. One is muter, one is asar. So as long as you have both on there, muter l'taltalo, you're allowed to move it. Such as, you have a kagon machta sheishalim ibad yom efer shemuter l'taltalo l'chasod bo rok otsoa. You have some kind of a bucket or a shovel, and you put dirt in there, but you set it aside for a purpose, so it becomes muter. But you also have pieces of wood that's useless. So you have two things there. You're allowed to move the whole thing, because it has both items there, and for you, the dirt is more important than the eitzim. But But the davar mutter does have to be of more value to you, not equal, but more value to you. But if the asr is more, and most say if it's equal, batel etzlo v'asr l'taltel, it becomes asr, and becomes a basis. And here, we'll see, it's difficult to remove it. Ideally, you don't want to schlep muktza with it, even if it's mutter, but you can't always remove it. You'll make a mess, you're going to end up losing all your dirt at the same time. Because here, it's too difficult. You can't remove, you can't be able to separate it. You're going to end up, okay. Or if you need the space, you don't want the dirt, the shivrei eitzim there, so therefore you're allowed to remove the whole thing, right? We learned this already. But if you only need the machta itself, and you don't care if you have a mess over there of the dirt and the twigs, don't carry the whole muktza, the whole item together with the muktza, shovel with the bucket. But if your whole purpose is just to get the machta, and you don't care if you have the mess on the floor and the items on the floor, then you shouldn't carry the muktza, you should just shake off everything. And just a small little principle, davar sheish, we know that when it comes to being batal, there's a principle, davar sheish matirin, afilo be'elef la batil. That if something, even though when it's davar sheish matirin, something's going to become mutter later, so the Mishnah Berurah points out that applies to muktza too, because after Shabbos it's muktza. So if you have an item that's muktza now, but it's going to become mutter later, then we don't say it's batal to the other item. He says that here in reference to some, mixed dirt. You have some dirt that's muktza and some dirt that's not muktza, and it was noticeable to you which is which, and then it gets mixed together. So then he says the whole thing becomes muktza. Haga, right? No. V'im eno tzarich el lagufa. Yeah, we read that. Haga. V'chen im yuchal anar isser lechud. If you can just get rid of the isser by itself, inarenu, that's the ideal. V'lo yitlenu im heter, so you don't have to carry a muktza at the same time, even though it's mutter because you need tzarakufa makomo. Ideally, you don't want to carry it. You don't want to move the muktza if you don't need to. We're talking about when the heter was there we're talking about becoming a basis, so you have to have the heter there during bein hashmashos. But if you only had the aval imaya ha'isra alav lavad, but if only the isra was there during bein hashmashos, lo mahani masha niachet so heter b'Shabbos. So then that's not going to help you, right? We learned this also. We'll review. Tet. Teva sheyesh ba'davar hamuter u'taltal uma'ot. If you have an item where you have, a basket, an item, a case, and you have in there mutter with money. So it's a combination, right? Im hamot enam ikar mutter u'taltal kamoshihi. So then, does it become a basis or not? So if the ma'ot is not the money that's in there is not the main thing, the other item is also important to you, you're allowed to move it like we mentioned before, which means empty it if you can, and if not, not.
Yoshev, Nissen, and Mater, the Mezuzah situation. Yoshev and Shama Yehuda writes tshuva on it,